Good evening. My name is Joseph Barr, and I'm the director of the Cambridge Traffic, Parking, and Transportation Department. And I'd also like to welcome you to tonight's meeting about our Porter Square Safety Improvement Project. I'm going to start off by providing some background on the reasons why we do these cycling safety projects and the sort of rationale behind them before I turn it over to Brooke and Andreas to talk in more specifics about this project. One important component of the background for this is the city's cycling safety ordinance, which was originally passed in 2019 by the city council. This requires the construction of separated bicycle lanes when streets are being reconstructed as part of the city's 5-year plan for streets and sidewalks, and where they've also been designated in the bicycle network vision as being locations where we would like to see greater separation for cyclists. So that was kind of the starting point for a lot of the work, the more accelerated work on implementing separated bike lanes. Following the passage of the original ordinance in 2019, the City Council then amended the ordinance in October of 2020 to really try to further accelerate the implementation of separated bicycle lanes around Cambridge. And these amendments set ambitious requirements for installing approximately 25 miles of separated bike lanes within the next 5 to 7 years. The reason why the timeline is a little bit of a range is because there's different extensions that are possible through the ordinance, but basically by somewhere between 2026 and 2028. The location of these facilities is informed by both the bicycle network vision that I mentioned earlier, but also very specific requirements that are laid out in the ordinance itself in terms of streets where we need to install separation both generally and within specific timeframes. This slide describes the locations or corridors where we are required to do separated bicycle lanes. So we have to install separated bicycle lanes along all of Massachusetts Avenue, and that includes the segment through Porter Square, which is what we're here to discuss tonight. But we also are required to do it along Broadway between Quincy Street and Hampshire Street, as well as on Cambridge Street from Oak Street, which is where the current project in Inman Square ends, all the way down to 2nd Street in East Cambridge. On Hampshire Street from Amory Street to where it meets Broadway, and then on Garden Street roughly from Huron Avenue to the Cambridge Common. There's a little bit of nuance to that as described on the slide, but basically it's to connect from the Cambridge Common west to Huron Avenue. In addition to that, we have about another 11.6 miles of separated bicycle lanes that have to be installed in other locations based on the bicycle network vision plan. And those can be in other locations around the city to be determined by city staff in consultation with the community. On the left of this slide, you can see a list of projects that we've done in the past that included separated bicycle lanes, including other sections of Mass Ave, Cambridge Street on the western half of Cambridge Street, west of Inman Square, the sidewalk level cycle track or separated bicycle lanes on Western Avenue, Brattle Street near Harvard Square, as well as significant sections of Binney Street and Galileo Way in East Cambridge or in Kendall Square, and then many other locations around the city. You can start to see these in both large and small segments of the streets. On the right, you can see a map of the bicycle network vision from the 2020 update to the city's bicycle plan, and the streets that are in purple on the map are the ones that are designated for greater separation. So as you can see, it's really trying to create a citywide network that spans most of the way across the city, so people can really connect from one end to the other or within it fairly easily, within separated bicycle lanes and also within the yellow streets, which are sort of low speed, low volume bicycle priority streets where people should feel safe cycling regardless of the fact whether there's bike lanes or not, but just based on low volumes and low speeds, they should be streets that are comfortable and safe for cyclists. And again, when you put this all together, you have a citywide network that allows people to travel all over Cambridge by bicycle in a safe manner that's accessible to pretty much everyone who's able to ride a bicycle. It's also important for everyone to understand the reasons why we design our streets the way we do and what drives our street design, because we are trying to design streets that are usable by people of all ages and abilities. And that means that we're focusing and including people who don't necessarily have access to a car, don't have access to a car all the time, and creating safe and accessible facilities, including bike lanes, but also other types of facilities that can be used by a wide range of people, as it says at the top, of all ages and abilities. When we think about vehicle congestion and delay, and this is maybe a little different than has been the case in the past or in other cities, we're not really trying to prioritize people who or eliminate delay for people who are driving alone in private vehicles. We're really focused on making the most efficient use of the space on our streets, focusing on moving people, not cars, or not, trucks. And as the slide says, moving people slowly is moving people safely. So it's not about speed. It's not about reducing delay necessarily. It's really about creating a multimodal network that can be used by a wide range of people. There's existing plans and policies within the city that go back really 30 years. Not just the cycling safety ordinance. The city has had a vehicle trip reduction ordinance since 1992 that really focused on trying to promote sustainable transportation, like walking and biking in public transit. The different growth policy documents over the years have really focused on non-automobile mobility because we know that we can't solve our transportation problems with private vehicles and widening our streets or making it easier to drive. And then in 2016, we passed both the Complete Streets policy, which is aimed at making sure our streets have facilities for all different kinds of users, and then our Vision Zero policy as well, which is really focused on trying to make our streets safer and eliminate fatalities and serious injuries from our transportation network. And so when you put all of that together, it really creates a focus on not how we move cars more effectively, but how we move people more effectively, like I said, and focusing on the sustainable transportation modes that really are our future here in Cambridge and probably elsewhere across the country as we look at things like climate change and other sustainability issues, as well as the safety and protecting the lives of our residents. And so really our focus is on moving people and goods, not their vehicles. Buses may run less frequently than cars, but they often carry more people, particularly on busy corridors like Mass Ave with the 77 in this case, or the one further south. We obviously can't ignore trucks and local deliveries, and we need to accommodate for that and work with local businesses to make that feasible. But again, it's really about the people and the goods inside those vehicles, not actually the vehicles themselves. So with that as introduction to the project and the sort of reasons behind it, I'm going to turn it over to Brooke McKenna again to speak a little bit more in detail about the project background and kind of what we're trying to accomplish.
Thank you, Joe. Now we'll get into some specifics about this particular project. As Joe mentioned, the entirety of Mass Ave is called out for separation in both the cycling safety ordinance and the bike plan's bike network vision. This particular section is Mass Ave from Roseland Street on the south to Beach Street on the north, encompassing the entirety of Porter Square. We have multiple goals for this project. First of all, we'll be providing safe, separated bicycle facilities that can be used by people of all ages and abilities. We'll meet the requirements of the cycling safety ordinance and align with the city's 2020 bike network vision, which called for separation along Mass Ave. Importantly, this project will support the city's Vision Zero goals to eliminate fatal and serious injury crashes for all users. Vision Zero is a key component to all of the work that we do in Cambridge around traffic safety. And finally, we'll address as many issues as possible for all stakeholders, including businesses, residents, institutions, and our public safety departments, most specifically the fire department, ensuring that our work aligns with their very important safety mission. It's important to take a moment and really dive into the benefits of separated bike lanes. Research shows that there are fewer crashes on corridors with separated bike lanes. Separated bike lanes also provide distance between parked cars and cyclists, eliminating the threat of dooring, which is really one of the most dangerous aspects of biking in the city next to parking. The buffer in a separated bike lane also reduces conflicts between turning vehicles and people biking, because it provides some extra distance, and that means extra reaction time for the driver and the cyclist when that conflict does come up. Separated bike lanes also shorten the crossing distances for pedestrians where they're exposed to vehicular traffic. It increases the level of comfort for people biking, and this really means more people from all ages and all abilities feel comfortable and are attracted to using these facilities. It also provides an increased level of comfort for drivers, because drivers know where to expect the cyclists, and that takes away some of the difficulties of navigating and sharing the road. Separated lanes also enable more people to choose cycling as a transportation option. People who may want to cycle but not feel comfortable sharing the road with vehicles without the separation may opt to choose cycling once the separated lanes are available. And this in turn supports the city's climate goals. This project will be installed by the end of April of this year. This reflects the timeline set up in the cycling safety ordinance for a variety of segments of Mass Ave, including Roseland to Beach, which we're here talking about tonight. Before we move on to talk in more detail about the proposed project tonight, I just wanted to circle back and talk a little bit about the safety improvements we were able to make at the main Porter Square intersection back in 2018. At that time, we were able to make some pretty significant safety improvements, primarily through traffic signal timing changes, as well as some limited physical changes as well. We reduced the number of signal phases, which meant that all users of the intersection ended up waiting less for their turn. We also were able to improve the functionality of the jug handle for cyclists. If you look at the drawing on your right, you'll see the jug handle at the top of the screen, and this is a way that cyclists can make the left-hand turn onto Somerville Ave without having to mix with traffic and move over all the way to the left turn lane. And through the timing changes, we were able to make it much faster for cyclists to choose that safer option. And that, was a significant safety improvement there. We were also able to separate the right turning vehicles from the northbound Mass Ave onto Somerville Ave. We were able to separate those turning vehicles from cyclists and pedestrians so that they are not moving at the same time and eliminating that serious conflict. We did want to circle back on those pretty significant traffic safety improvements we were able to make back in 2018. Next, we're going to transition into talking about the existing conditions in the project area. And for that, I will hand things over to Andreas Wolf, the project manager.
First of all, we want to go over the existing configuration of the road. So right now, as many of you are likely aware, so essentially on Mass Ave in the spot we have 2 travel lanes in either direction, painted bike lanes, so not separated bike lanes, but just the ones that are out there between parking and the travel lane. There are overhead wires for the MBTA that are important to allow their trackless trolley buses to reach the garage where they operate out of in North Cambridge. These wires also, they pose a number of constraints in certain and certain challenges to construction and fire access, and so that's something we'll be going over later in the presentation. Porter Square is also, as many of you know, a key transit hub. First of all, it's a station on the Red Line, but it also is a connection point to the commuter rail, and then there's 3 bus routes that come through Porter Square, and one of these is the 77, which is a key bus route. So, and the MBTA has certain bus routes which run at higher frequency. One of their key bus routes, one of which is the 77. So it's a major transit hub, and that was really shown in 2020. We did a assessment of kind of how people get to the square, and that identified that 35% of shoppers in Porter Square arrived by bus or subway. So this is part of a key point in the transit network. So the area sees a lot of usage by bicyclists, despite not having safe facilities. The current bike lanes are not separated, as we've gone over. But despite this, it's in addition to everyone, it's a key connection point for bicyclists. And the current bicycle lanes that are out there, as shown in the photo, don't meet the cycling safety ordinance and pose additional safety risks that we've gone over earlier in the presentation. We also counted the existing on-street parking supplying the area. There's various different types of parking here. First and most obviously, there's a metered parking, and that's shown in green on the map here. But you also have an additional number of uses. So, for example, there's accessible parking spaces, and we're committed as part of this to making sure that those spaces are retained and and hopefully we can actually add on the number of accessible parking spaces. And then, in addition, there's special use parking. So we have loading zones, valet zones, and a taxi zone. And so, we acknowledge that any changes that might need to be made to those types of spaces really do involve additional outreach with the users of those spaces to make sure that their needs are met or accommodated in the future design. There are some limited, parking and loading zones on the side streets as well. It's not all resident parking on the side streets. It's really varied, but also, we've already done a lot of that. So there's limited opportunity to add parking on side streets, but there is currently, different spots of 2-hour parking with loading zones and a variety of different parking regulations in side streets. So in the next few slides, we'll go over what it means to be a quick build project. That's a term that some may have heard thrown around before in previous projects. So this will just kind of explain, quick build versus other types of projects the city does, and those considerations are taken into what's taken into consideration when we do quick build. So quick build lets us do improvements to our streets more rapidly than a typical construction project. As part of quick build, though, we're limited more to pavement marking changes, flex posts, which are kind of the white stanchions that you might see around town, signage changes, and some limited changes to signal timing. So, for example, Brattle Street, shown in the photo here, that's an example of a previous quick build project the city has done. And so what we can't do as part of quick build is a lot of kind of the larger impact stuff. We cannot curbs and crosswalk. We cannot add crosswalks because, you have to install a new curb ramp. So while we can freshen up existing crosswalks, it's not possible to, install a new curb ramp. And, we're also not touching the utilities. So, that as part of making it quicker, that also means, we can't, do some of the construction elements like that involve any sorts of digging or curb removal either. And so the city does do larger construction projects at times. We have a very robust 5-year sidewalk and street reconstruction plan. All of these projects are programmed into that 5-year plan. This is really important. It lets us coordinate with utility companies so that they have the notice, and so that means that we're only digging, we're minimizing the amount of times that we're having to dig up the street. So, rather than having to come back again because the utility was missed, it's all kind of done at once in one project. That also lets us, by programming it into the 5-year plan, we can best leverage our funding sources. So, we do these projects throughout the city, but the one that we're talking about today is not part of the 5-year plan. There's the primary reason for that is that, we are on as for the ordinance, this project has to be installed by April of 2022. So putting it into our 5-year plan would substantially delay, push the project out and into the future. It's not something that lets us meet the ordinance timeline and provide the benefits as quickly. Another key design consideration during this project has really been working closely with the fire department to make sure that we're not doing anything that impedes their operations. Already as is, we know that this section of Mass Ave is really tough for the fire department to respond to emergencies in. And that's kind of shown in the photo here on the right side. Because of the overhead wires and some other factors that we'll get into, they have to position their ladder trucks all the way over on the far right next to the parking in order to get underneath those wires. That lets them, reach the upper floors of buildings. It also lets them put out fires that might be on the roof, and so that really applies anywhere on the corridor to any of the buildings. And it's something that's really important that we maintain for obvious reasons, and something that kind of we consider a lot in design, and we'll go over in more detail. What that means for the design, it means that we can't have any obstructions further out in the street. So, right now you have parking up against the curb. Sometimes when we do separated bike lanes, they're next to parking, and so you have the parking is actually the protection of the bicyclist. This is not something we can do on this stretch of Mass Ave. That creates an obstruction by having that parking out in the street. Then and this is shown in the photo on the bottom right. If you were to, if the fire department were to respond to an emergency and try to deploy their ladder from the left lane, they wouldn't be able to reach those buildings. And the wires have high voltage, and any kind of contact with the wires could be fatal. So that's something we're really paying close attention to. The wires are used right now for the MBTA. While the 77, for example, doesn't run on the wires, they still need the wires because they're the connection between the car house in North Cambridge and the other lines that do. And any changes to the wire are really at the MBTA's discretion, as the current vehicles they use need those wires. Another major consideration was the median. The median causes a number of things. One of which is that in a lot of separated bike lane projects, that means we often will shift lanes around. So for example, on Cambridge Street, when we installed separated bike lanes on there a few years ago, that also, the center line, we actually moved over. So, you would have parking, and then the parking might flip to the other side. So then the middle of the road is actually shifting over. We cannot change on Mass Ave here. We cannot change the location of the center of the road. It's a fixed object. Changes to the median would not make the project quick build because they would involve construction. And then, in addition, the median also has there's important issues that come up with fire access with the median as well. It reduces the width of the street to below the optimal width for them to deploy their truck. So, while it varies on location, but their truck may need, 15 to 16 feet to properly deploy stabilizers on either side. One travel lane is 11 to 12 feet, and so that's narrower. So we need to keep that in mind too, that we have enough space between the two curbs, in this case the median and the sidewalk, to properly enable a response to a fire as well. We'll begin to discuss the different intersections along the stretch of Mass Ave and what specifically, are some key considerations at each location. So first off, Mass Ave at Beach. At Beach, we're looking at the northbound area here. There's a large number of vehicles making the right onto Beach Street. This creates a conflict between people turning right and people walking and people biking. There's also there's a substantial amount of delay currently from this intersection for all users, including for transit riders. We also have a variety of bus routes here. We have buses that continue straight. We have the 77 and the 83, but also a bus that takes a right. And that'll be important consideration later on. Mass Ave at Somerville Ave. So going off what's there right now, so in the southbound direction, there's a bus stop, and that's shown in the top photo. You have a bus stop right after Somerville Ave between Somerville and Upland Road. But we cannot put in separation for the bike lane at a bus stop because that would affect the bus's ability to reach the curb, which is important from an accessibility standpoint. So no separation would be put in there. The bus would still reach the curb. And then the northbound direction, we have, and shown in the photo on the right, there's a lot of right turning traffic onto Somerville Ave, and back in 2018, what we did is we put in a signal phase separation, so people turning right are going at a different time as the people biking or the people in the crosswalk, and that provided some safety benefits and that's something we were talking about earlier about that 2018 project. And so continuing on this section here between Somerville Ave and Upland Road, so southbound, as we said, we're not putting in separation because there's an existing bus stop. In the northbound direction, so the bike lane currently is too narrow for us to add separation. When a major issue for that is that we can't maintain the lane if it's under a certain width, about 7 feet, and right now it's about 5.5 to 6 feet. So that means that we cannot street clean at that location. It means we can't plow it, and so we don't want to add separation to the existing lane. At the same time, so if we were to add separation, we'd have to widen it, but we don't have the ability to widen that lane and for that section without removing one of the travel lanes. No matter which way we did it, if we were to remove a travel lane, we think it would have a really negative impact on transit. In addition to all vehicles, but transit is something that we're acutely aware of. We don't want to add delay as part of a project, especially to transit. We also made a number of safety improvements here in 2018, such as that phased signal separation we discussed. And so, and also this is a state facility. The bridge itself is actually owned by Mass DOT, and state facilities are not part of the cycling safety ordinance as well, which is another factor. And so, given all that, we don't really think that modifications for this short section are advisable right now. And so, what's shown on the right is the existing, and this section from right now we expect it would largely stay the same. So next up, we're going to be showing different possible configurations we might be able to do for the rest of the roadway. We're still very early on in this process, and we haven't, we don't have a design, we don't have plans, but we do have some preliminary ideas, and so we want to share that information. So the next few slides contain a good amount of information. We're going to be sharing different possible layouts for the street. We're going to talk about the intersections and different things we can do at the side streets. We'll discuss some alternatives that we had looked at, but for various reasons weren't feasible. And then, for all of those, we'll discuss kind of the benefits, provide a brief summary of what it is. And so some things to consider as you're looking through this information. Does this idea meet your needs, or how can it be improved to do so? We'll take public comment at the end of the meeting. We'll have, we'll provide you a chance to provide any feedback, ask any questions about anything we've shared today. We're also planning on sharing a link to a survey where we'll solicit more detailed feedback. A lot of location information specifics might be easier for many to share in the survey as well. So you don't have to comment on specifics necessarily unless you like to. Feel free to just give us your general feedback. Any questions, ideas, and then you'll have a chance to review all this information again, provide your feedback through a survey, and then of course we'll be providing our contact information. And so there'll be more information on this feedback at the end as well. But first we're going to get into the different ideas for the layouts. So the first one, all of these alternatives, they'll have separated bike lanes. The first option, there's 2 travel lanes as there are currently, and then separated bike lanes on the right side. So under this, there's no reduction in the number of travel lanes, but that this results in removal of parking, and so there's no stopping for vehicles. We would, under any alternative, we'll keep accessible parking. So people who have a placard there'll still be spaces throughout the corridor, and in those locations we won't have separation, but we haven't determined where or anything like that specifically. And for generally this is what you would have 2 travel lanes and a separated bike lane with no parking. And this option, it meets the fire department's needs to allow their vehicle to move over to the right and get under the wires, since we're not creating an obstruction like parking in the right-hand lane. Benefits, potentially to this kind of layout is this causes no additional vehicular delay. You still have 2 travel lanes. It also, importantly creates the least amount of delay for all vehicles, so that includes buses. This is kind of has the least amount of impacts on bus service overall, compared with the other option that we'll share. Some drawbacks, as stated, this involves the complete removal of at least 2-hour metered parking. The only parking that would be able to keep would be we'd be able to keep accessible parking. So, there's that, and then also potentially loading zones, and we'll have more on that in the second slide. And this option, it doesn't do anything to improve transit, but it does have the least amount of impact. So the next option is an option where it's similar, except in the right lane we have a loading zone we have a bus lane that can be a loading zone during certain times of the day. So not at the same time, but rather during certain hours, during the rush hour, it's a bus lane, and then say midday, it becomes a loading zone. We haven't, done any determination on just what hours yet or anything like that. It's just kind of in the early stages of planning an idea. So the loading zone hours, this would be treated as a standard loading zone in the city, which means it's 15-minute parking for anyone, and then 30 minutes for commercial vehicles. So, while this does add some obstruction for the fire department, it meets their criteria because in the case of an emergency, drivers are able to get back in their vehicle and quickly get out of the way. They're close by because it's short-term parking, unlike 2-hour parking where, they could be off and you could have a major issue. So this also meets the fire department criteria. So the key benefit to this option versus the other option is that it at least provides people driving a chance to stop their vehicle for pick up and drop off. But there are some drawbacks to this option. The first option we shared overall, as we stated, had the least amount of impact on transit. So this option, while you're providing a bus lane during certain hours, during the hours that the bus lane is being used for loading, you would actually see a reduction in service and reliability for transit. So this one actually creates more delay for buses than the first option. This also creates additional more vehicular delay than the first option because you're going down to a single lane for traffic. And it also results in the removal of 2-hour parking. We would still be able to have loading in this option, and we'd also be able to, accessible parking we'd be able to have, but metered parking would be removed. The final design, we end up choosing, could mix these two options. We don't have to do the same cross-section everywhere. So, one block, one direction might, have one, another section might have the second option. So it's location by location. And that'll just, depend on what we hear from the public. That'll also depend on the unique constraints, physical constraints at each location. But as a baseline, we wanted to provide this table that kind of summarizes the two. So in terms of biking, both options, they provide separated bike lanes, The separation is the same, so they both improve cyclist safety and comfort. In terms of bus impacts, so the first option of 2 travel lanes, travel time and reliability is really just, it's unaffected by the project during all hours. So that has, the least impact. And the second option, you're actually, you're improving reliability potentially during certain hours, but you would be in other hours when there's loading, because the road is going down to 1 lane and buses are using that 1 lane of mixed traffic, you're actually impacting transit, and so that creates a negative impact on transit. Then in addition, so for driving, the first option we provide, there's no parking or loading, but it has no impacts on travel times and delay. The second option retains some loading, but it has significant travel time impacts because you're going down to 1 lane. Next, we'll go over some additional ideas that, for a variety of reasons, don't meet our criteria, but we'll go over, what they were and kind of explain the reasoning behind that. So the first one of those was the idea of having non-separated bike lanes, kind of like what is out there right now. This, keeps parking up against the curb. There's, there would be the option to have a bus lane still in one of the travel lanes, but this does not provide separated bike lanes. And, this does not meet our project goals. This does not provide safe, separated facilities, and importantly, doesn't meet the requirements of the cycling safety ordinance. So this is an option that we did not pursue. The next option that we ruled out was the idea of having parking to the left of the bike lane. So, this provides separated bike lanes, similarly to the other options, but the right-hand travel lane essentially becomes parking. And this reduces Mass Ave to 1 lane for all traffic. So there's a number of reasons we did not pursue this. As stated before, the overhead wires, by putting parking floating, as it were, out there, that puts the fire truck in the wrong position to respond to an emergency. And then also because of the median and the width constraints that creates as well for deploying a fire truck. And also, 1 lane creates significant amounts of delay for all vehicles, but including transit, which is something we're really concerned about. And then another idea that we rolled out, but one that we hear about, from people, was putting the bike lane on the left side, or having them run down the middle of the street. So this, by doing this, you shift the bike lane over, and so that, allows people to park at the curb. This also, it reduces the road down to 1 lane for through traffic. But this doesn't meet our project goals for a number of reasons. This introduces bicycling to an unexpected location. It creates a lot of conflicts between, for vehicles making those turns as well, coming into interaction with a bicyclist in a place where it's not expected. In addition, because we're looking at a very short project, you would have you would be making people biking make a somewhat uncomfortable movement across the street and then back over again. We also kind of considered, when we actually considered the what this means for operations of the street, it wouldn't be it would involve a significant amount of signal work to make happen. That would be very challenging. And in addition to all that, this creates a substantial amount of delay by going down to the one lane as well. For a number of reasons, this is not an option that we pursued, but the primary one being that it just didn't meet the goals of the project of providing a safe facility. And so next we'll talk about the different intersections, and we're going to start with Mass Ave at Beach Street. And so we have the first option we have here. So as stated before, we have a high amount of traffic making a right turn, including a bus route. And so general best practice when you have that situation and you have separated bike lanes is to have those two going at a separate time. So you would have a right turn signal and then a red light, and then the greens would a green for the bicyclists, and then it would switch, and so that the right turns are going, and then the bikes are being held. So this improves safety by, it separates out, it reduces the chance of conflict between a bicyclist and turning vehicles. But it also creates additional delay for all vehicles, including transit, because you're instead of being able to go straight from both lanes, now traffic is only going straight from the left lane. The second option would be essentially the signal and the lanes would function as they do right now. Where the right lane is, you can go straight or turn right. This, improves throughput of vehicles, so that is causing less delay to the bus than the first option, in addition to causing less delay to everyone else. But this doesn't provide the separation between the time separation between the right turns and people biking and people walking. So to summarize, the first option, the dedicated right turn lane, provides improved safety and comfort for people walking and biking, but increases delay for all vehicles, including buses. And then the second option, where it remains the same, creates less vehicular delay. Buses can use both lanes. But it does not improve safety, and it also doesn't improve bus reliability. It just results in less impact. Next, we'll talk about Mass Ave at Upland Road. So we have a few options here, which we'll go over in the next few slides. So our first option would be we could. So currently, Upland Road is a two-way street. We could make it one-way going towards Mass Ave. This has a number of benefits. So, for example, this allows us to add parking on Upland Road because you're removing one of those travel lanes. That creates more width. This also addresses safety issues. It eliminates the left turn into Upland Road from Mass Ave. Which, just in general, when you remove a left turn movement like that, that results in a safer operations. It also helps mitigate the delay on Mass Ave. So, if we were to remove a travel lane on Mass Ave, reduces the number of phases in that signal and actually helps move traffic a little better and help offset some of those impacts. The flip side to all this is that this reduces access to Upland Road, and so it would be if you were trying to get into Upland Road from Mass Ave, you'd have to find an alternative route by going north or south to, say, Walden Street or Linnaean Street, and making your way back into Upland Road. So the next option it would be to have Upland Road run one way away from Mass Ave, so you could only turn into it. This, as the same with the first option, allows for additional parking. It mitigates delay because you're still removing one of the signal phases. But it doesn't do as good of a job of addressing safety because you still have people making the turn into Upland Road. It also, just like option one, would reduce access. It just would have it flipped around. So if you were trying to come out of Upland Road, if you would have to go around onto one of the other streets. And the last option for Upland Road is that we keep it the same. We don't make changes. So, we wouldn't be able to add new parking there. This also doesn't, help offset the delay on Mass Ave or address safety, but it does, retain the existing configuration and allows for access to Upland Road from both directions. Next, we just have a summary of this. So you've got the first option, one way towards Mass Ave, which addresses delay, adds parking, addresses safety, but reduces access. And then one way away from Mass Ave, addresses safety and adds parking, addresses delay and adds parking, but does not address safety and reduces access. And then keeping it as is, where you don't have it retains the existing access, but you don't get kind of any of the benefits that we had discussed. So next steps going forward, we're still very early on in this process, but as we stated, this project will be in April, as stated by the ordinance. We have the April 30th deadline. So first of all, we're going to be absorbing and collecting your feedback over the coming months. We intend to host a second community meeting sometime later in the winter. By that point, we'll have heard a lot from you, and we'll have a more refined design to share. We're also going to be conducting targeted outreach for businesses to hear kind of specifics and have those one-on-one conversations. And as we talked about earlier, we're putting together a survey, and so that just provides people with another chance to provide their input and have more time to write something up and review kind of these options and ideas that we had discussed today in a more detailed way. And so we're going to provide some details on how to access that survey.